What is that white shape sticking out from the damp leaves? Look closer. Is it a stone? No. Move those branches, Sarah. There, it is a skull, a child's skull. This is not how a crisp October morning in 1973 was supposed to begin in the woods of Clear Creek, Pennsylvania. But for 18 years, this silent witness sat under the hemlocks while a monster walked free just 30 miles away in a neighboring county. For nearly 2 decades, the files on this case sat in 168 yellowed, overstuffed binders, buried under thousands of rusted paper clips and handwritten notes that led nowhere. Investigators turned over every rock in this sleepy town of 500 people, yet the man they were looking for was already in their system. He was hiding in plain sight, protected by the very bureaucracy meant to catch him. Today we are opening the Cold Case Johanna file, a declassified journey through the analog blindness of the 1970s and the digital revolution that finally dragged a killer into the light. This is a story about the price of a single paperclip and the 50 feet of packing tape that shattered a 20-year-old alibi. Look at this first photograph in the stack, Sarah. It is a Polaroid from August 1972. The colors are slightly shifted to that warm 70s orange. It is a birthday party. 8-year-old Johanna is smiling, holding a small stuffed lion. Her father, a man who moved his family from the grimy industrial sprawl of Philadelphia to the perceived safety of Clear Creek, is beaming in the background. In a town this small, where everyone knows your license plate and your grandmother's maiden name, you don't lock your doors. You let your children ride their bikes to the sports field alone. It was a Tuesday, September 2nd, 1972. The air was thick with the scent of mown grass and the coming autumn. Joanna hopped on her bike at 4:30 p.m., promising to be back for dinner by 7. It was the last time her father would see her alive. The terror of a small town isn't just the crime itself, it's the sudden realization that the safe world you built was an illusion. By 7:15 p.m., the sun was dipping below the Appalachian ridgeline, and the panic began to set in. If you look at this original police dispatch log from that night, see the smudged carbon copy, the urgency is palpable. Subject failed to return, blue bicycle, white t-shirt. The whole town turned out. The fire department, the local high school football team, neighbors with flashlights. They searched the creek, the old mill, the woods behind the stadium. Nothing. Just an empty bridge and a bike laying in the dirt like a discarded toy. No struggle, no blood, just silence. But then, a witness came forward. A local mechanic, a man who knew cars like the back of his hand. He told the state troopers he saw a silver Chevy Nova creeping along the dirt road near the bridge. He even thought he saw the driver, but the light was failing. He gave them a partial plate, a local Pennsylvania tag. The police did exactly what they were trained to do in 1972. They pulled the records. They found 600 silver Novas registered in the surrounding 3 counties. It was a Herculean task. Imagine these young troopers in their wide-collared uniforms, knocking on 600 doors, checking trunks, asking for alibis. One of those doors belonged to a man named Michael Corner. He was a loner, a guy who worked odd jobs and had a history of minor incidents involving young girls in the mid-60s. When the troopers showed up at his trailer, Corner was calm. He told them he'd had a minor fender bender that afternoon and was home with his girlfriend for the rest of the evening. The troopers checked his car. The paint didn't quite match the mechanic's description. It was more of a dull gray than silver. The girlfriend nodded along with his story, and just like that, Michael Corner was checked off the list. He wasn't a lead anymore. He was just another folder in a mountain of paper. 7 months later, the skull was found, 90 miles away. The coroner's report from April 1973 is haunting. It describes the remains not as a person, but as a collection of evidence. Found with the body was a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, a pair of jeans, and a massive amount of heavy-duty packing tape. The tape was still wrapped around the skull. The lab techs in the early 70s were good, but they were limited. They managed to find a partial fingerprint on the sticky side of the tape and some microscopic red fibers. But back then, you couldn't just search a fingerprint database with a partial. You had to have a suspect first, then compare it manually under a magnifying glass. The red fibers? They could have come from a million carpets. The investigation hit a wall. For the next 17 years, the Clear Creek child became a ghost story told to keep local kids from wandering too far. Fast forward to the winter of 1990. The world is changing. The Berlin Wall has fallen, and in police departments across America, the first beige desktop computers are starting to hum. A new task force is formed, the Cold Case Squad. They inherited 168 binders of paper, thousands of pages of handwritten interviews, blurry Polaroids, and coffee-stained reports. But here's the problem, Sarah. Look at these binders. They weren't organized by name or car type. They were organized by the date they were filed. If Michael Corner's name appeared in binder 3 because of his car, and again in binder 80 because of a separate incident 3 years later, no human being would ever connect the two. The analog blindness was the killer's best friend. The detectives decided on a Sisyphus task. They were going to digitize every single word in those 168 volumes. They spent months pulling out thousands of rusted staples and paper clips. They scanned every page using early optical character recognition software. They made the archives searchable. And then, someone typed the name Corner into the search bar. Suddenly, the screen blinked. Michael Corner didn't just appear once, he appeared 4 times. Once in 1972 as a Nova owner, once in 1965 for a public indecency charge near a school, once in 1978 for a similar incident in a different county, and most chillingly, he had been reported in 1989 for stalking a 14-year-old girl in a park, using a roll of packing tape to threaten her. The digital dots were finally connecting. The detectives realized that the red fibers found on Johanna's body in 1973 were an exact match for the carpet of a 1972 Chevy Nova, the very car Corner had been driving when he was first interviewed. The arrest happened on a cold morning in February 1991. Corner was living in a cluttered, hoarder-style house. When the SWAT team entered, they found a man who had frozen in time. He still had the same furniture from the 70s. He had boxes of old newspapers, clippings, all of them about the disappearance of Johanna. But the smoking gun was in the attic. In a blue plastic tool bin, tucked behind some rusted saws, was a partially used roll of heavy-duty packing tape. The forensic analysts in 1991 used a scanning electron microscope to compare the tear patterns and chemical composition of the tape found on the child's skull in 1973 with the roll found in Corner's attic. It was a perfect match. The tape he used to silence a child 18 years ago had been sitting in his house the entire time. It was his trophy. The interrogation room in the 1990s was a different beast than the 70s. No more good old boy handshakes. The detective sat Corner down and laid out the digital printouts. They showed him the fiber matches. They showed him the tape analysis. Corner tried one last lie. He told them it was an accident. He claimed he found the girl, she was hurt, he panicked, and he put her in his trunk. He said he wrapped the tape around her head to protect her, but left her nose uncovered so she could breathe. He looked the detectives in the eye and said, "I'm not a murderer, it was a mistake." He thought he could still play the system. He thought the jury would see a sad, lonely old man. But then came the climax of the trial. The lead investigator didn't use a computer for this. He brought a roll of the same packing tape into the courtroom. He asked for a volunteer to hold the end. He began to walk. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. He didn't stop until he reached 50 feet. That is how much tape was wrapped around that 8-year-old girl's head. 50 feet. He turned to the jury and said, "You don't wrap 50 feet of industrial tape around a child's face to protect them. You do it to ensure they never speak again." The defense's accident theory evaporated in seconds. It wasn't an accident, it was an execution. Michael Corner was sentenced to life without parole in 1992, 19 years after that skull was found in the Pennsylvania woods. As we close this archive today, look at that final photo in the file. It's the father, 20 years older, standing by a small headstone. He finally got his answer, but the cost was 2 decades of agonizing silence. This case wasn't solved by a stroke of genius or a sudden confession. It was solved by the slow, grinding progress of technology overcoming human error. It was solved because someone decided that no amount of rusted paper clips should be allowed to hide a monster. The analog age allowed Michael Corner to vanish in a mountain of paper, but the digital age ensured he would never be forgotten. The files are back in the drawer now, but the lesson remains. The truth doesn't die, it just waits for the tools to find it. Consider the landscape of justice in that era, the mid-1970s. We're talking about a time when a man could cross a state line and effectively become a new person. In 1974, just south of the Mason-Dixon line, police were dealing with a surge of transient crime. The records were physical. If a detective in Ohio wanted to check a suspect's history in Pennsylvania, he had to pick up a rotary phone, hope the right clerk was working, and wait 3 days for a letter to arrive by post. This information lag was the shadow where predators lived. In the Corner case, the local Clear Creek police were overwhelmed. They weren't bad cops, they were just drowning in a sea of carbon paper. They had the killer's name on a list of 600, but without a way to cross-reference his priors from other jurisdictions, he was just a name. Think about the psychology of the hoarder for a moment. Why did he keep the tape? In the files, the psychiatric evaluation suggests that for men like Corner, the physical objects of their crimes are more than just tools. They are anchors to the moment they felt most powerful. Keeping that roll of tape in a blue bin in his attic for 18 years wasn't just laziness, it was a ritual. Every time he went into that attic, he saw it. He knew what it had done. He lived with the ghost of Johanna every day, and he thrived on it. The fact that his own trophy became the very thing that sent him to a cell is a poetic form of justice that the analog world almost missed. When we look back at the 168 binders today, we see more than just a cold case. We see a graveyard of missed opportunities. There was a note, handwritten on a yellow legal pad in 1975, from a neighbor who mentioned seeing a man matching Corner's description walking near the woods 3 weeks after the disappearance. That note was filed in binder number 42. The original interview with Corner was in binder number 2. No one ever put binder 2 and binder 42 on the same desk at the same time. It took a machine, a primitive 1990 computer with 640 kilobytes of RAM, to do what a dozen detectives couldn't: remember everything at once. The story of the Clear Creek child changed how Pennsylvania handles missing persons cases. It led to the creation of centralized digital repositories for child abductions. It proved that minor sexual offenses are often the tremors before the earthquake. But most importantly, it gave a voice back to a girl who had been silenced by 50 feet of tape. The silence of the woods in 1973 was finally broken by the clacking of a keyboard in 1990. As the sun sets on this cold case, we're reminded that the archives might be dusty, and the ink might be fading, but the data never sleeps. Every time you see a silver car on a lonely road or a roll of tape sitting on a workbench, remember Michael Corner. Remember the town of 500 that lost its innocence on a Tuesday afternoon. And remember that justice, while often delayed by the weight of paper and the rust of a paperclip, is inevitable when we finally refuse to let the truth stay buried. The Clear Creek file is now officially closed. But for the family of Johanna, The healing only truly began when the last piece of tape was unrolled in that courtroom, revealing the face of the man who had been hiding in the shadows of their own backyard for 18 long years.